Hello family, this is African Escort and I'm here with a new video. So I'm sure all of you have seen by now this past week or last week when Notre Dame, the famous cathedral, basically burned. A significant portion of the cathedral burned. And all over the Western Hemisphere, all over, actually all hemispheres, people have been showing that they are remorseful or they're sad and they want to help and they want to rebuild this building. Now, there's two, different things that I want to talk about in regard to this. I didn't, comment on it initially because I wanted to see if it was true, but there was some reports coming out that some African leaders were going to donate money to the rebuilding of Notre Dame. Now, of course, Notre Dame is actually a French colony. Or a French church, sorry. It's a church in France. France happens to be the worst colonizer of Africa. France still enforces the CFA franc, and basically it's a currency in Africa that gives the French a significant portion of the reserve of that currency. They have control over that. The people don't have control over their own money. They don't have control over the reserve or what backs that currency. All of that is controlled by France. This allows them to ensure that they are able to take money from the African people just by way of them using this currency. This is just one policy over of many policies that France has used in order to enforce control over the African region. And to me, it's still odd that a lot of people have not identified France as being a very clear oppressor of African people, a very unapologetic oppressor of African people. As many of you know, the former president of France even said that if Africa doesn't, if France didn't have Africa, then France would basically disappear and become a nothingness country. That's how much they depend on Africa. That's how much they depend on the money that they get from the CFA franc and other programs. That's how much they depend on the exploitative relationship that they have with Africa. So it's very telling that, number one, that people aren't aware as a mass that this country is at war with you. It's not they're just, our allies. No, they're actually at war with you because they're enforcing policies that go directly contrary to your interests as a people. So, number one, they've clearly declared that they are at war with the people inside of these former Francophone countries. Some of them being countries like Cameroon, countries like Togo, countries like Morocco. They're clearly at war with a lot of these countries that they used to have colonial control over. But not only that, but the people must see that the leadership in these countries are showing that you are not their priority, number one, but number two, that they are a part of a global system that actually works contrary to the people that elected them. And this is the global system of white supremacy. So I'm going to read from an article. This article is from Kia Africa. And it says, people in Guinea are starving, but their president just donated to Notre Dame Cathedral. In Africa, many leaders have been sending their condolences to Notre Dame, but the Guinean leader and the Ivorian chief did more than that. Now, the fact that they're sending their condolences over a burning building, I don't care the historical significance. It is a building. No one died in the fire. Let's keep in mind the fact that thousands of Africans die in Western provoked conflicts all the time, and you never hear about France or America. You hardly ever hear them actually give condolences to these people. So it's already a one-sided relationship. You're sending your condolences for the burning of a building. Meanwhile, people have ignored your lives, have ignored your way of life, your quality of life, have ignored the people who have died in monsoons and horrible storms, and yet you're sending your condolences for the burning of a building for someone who actually doesn't care about your well-being. That's very telling in itself. It goes on to say, President Alpha Conde of Guinea Republic, a former French colony, is reported to have donated 2 million euros, and a chief from a traditional area in the Ivory Coast named Aman Ndofu V of Sanwi in southeastern pledged financial support towards rebuilding the iconic structure in Paris. I am in full consultation with my elders. We are going to make a donation for the rebuilding of this monument, the traditional leader said of the structure, which he claimed played a huge part in his kingdom's history in the 17th century. I couldn't get sleep because I was so disturbed by the pictures. So this is so disturbing to them. Our people being slaughtered is not disturbing to him. He's disturbed by the pictures of a burning building. Also keep in mind that he said this is a part of his people's history, and he says it in regard to part of his kingdom in the 17th century. And this also is a very telling of the colonial effects of ignoring what you were prior to what white people enforced you or taught you to be. Meaning you were not always a subject of colonialism. You were not always a subject of the King of England, the Queen of England, the King of France, all these people. You were not always a part of their history. You were not always someone who was a civilization that was birthed out of their history. At one time, you were an independent people. You were a powerful people. You stood on your own. You didn't have to look to Europe for direction or look to Europe for culture. You had your own culture. You had your own significance. And yet you have completely abandoned that because you have been taught by colonialism to completely forget who you were previously, who you really are. And instead you have accepted the role of being a servant to someone who actually not only doesn't care about you, but advocates actively against your own interests. This is what colonialism does to the African mind. It teaches us that who we really are and who we were prior to this colonized state. And remember, colonialism is not that old. Colonialism, 100 years ago, African people were not colonized. Yet they're so convinced that this colonial regime, this system, is their all and be all, and that creates in them a sense of being a servant to their master, and they've forgotten who they are. And not a lot of these leaders are interested in who they were. Most of them are interested in maintaining the status quo. Now this is more telling because it's actually not a leader of an African country in the sense that it's not a president or someone who's actually in politics. This is actually a chief. But understand that most African people did have to go through the colonial education system. And that's where they got their understanding of who they are and of what their country is. And that's really where they developed a lot of their understanding of themselves. So to keep going, in just 24 hours, this is European privilege, 24 hours, a fund to restore the medieval Notre Dame Cathedral that was devastated by fire was hit with over $1 billion, with donations pouring in around the world. The Paris landmark was heavily damaged after a fire broke out during a Roman Catholic mass and quickly spread to the roof in the iconic church spire. So $1 billion in 24 hours. This is just to let you know that European lives, not just their lives, but their historical buildings, their things that they have that they have built in the past matters way more to the world than you do. And this is something we should know already, because the other aspect of this obviously is pan-Europeanism. So we know Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism is a reaction to Pan-Europeanism, meaning Pan-Africanism was created because when African people started waking up to the fact that European colonialism and slavery and all these things, it wasn't an individual country doing it. It was a global effort. It wasn't just the US. It wasn't just England. It wasn't just France. It wasn't just Germany. It wasn't just Belgium. It was all of them working together. And this lets you know that they still have the same sense of Pan-Europeanism. Now, unfortunately, a lot of Black people are pushing back on having the same unity and the same sentiment as Pan-Africanism, which was, again, it was a reaction saying that if all of y'all had to get together in order to create this global system that oppresses us, all of us who outnumber you, we should get together and make sure that we actually enforce our own system to combat your system and your system's oppression over us. So although our people have not yet completely come together under Pan-Africanism, the Europeans are constantly showing you that they are together in their efforts and in their sentiment and in their sense of culture and their sense of being. So of course, Donald Trump and America and the Americans have been just lamenting, even President Obama. And this is why this is not necessarily a white versus black thing. This is a white supremacy, system of white supremacy versus those who aren't a part of the system type of thing. Because even though Obama was black, he also was a part of the global Western system that has oppressed many black people and has benefited the overall European system. So this is what we have today, is this system. And when you have the president of the United States, a lot of people pointed out, the other thing I wanted to point out was that a lot of people were saying, well, there's black churches that have been burned by white supremacists in the South. And yet you want to talk about what's going on over in France, one church that's not your own country. Well, let's be clear. This is the reason why he cared so much, is because this is the understanding that they have. Like, we don't have the understanding that Europeans, they are one people, they are one system, they're one culture, and that they feed off of each other. I don't understand why we don't understand that yet. And I'm not saying that to say that it's right. I'm saying it to say that they are acting the way that they have continuously acted. So for Donald Trump to go and talk about Notre Dame and not say anything about the churches in the United States, he's a part of the global system. He's a part of pan-Europeanism. He's not a part of anything that goes towards the sentiments of black people. So this is just something to keep in mind. Don't be surprised when you have, what in France, there was, if there's a terrorist attack, or in England, if there's a terrorist attack, in Iceland, if there's a terrorist attack, and anywhere where white people reside, if there's a terrorist attack, don't be so surprised when you see the countries that aren't necessarily even majority white countries. I mean, pretty soon America is going to be a majority black country. Not black, Hispanic country. But don't be surprised when you see these countries where white power is very much in place, running to their aid, talking to them, saying that we're going to support you, we're going to back you, we're going to do whatever we can for you, despite the fact that the idea is that they don't have the same national interest as these other countries, because they're all basically of different interests. But that's you who believe that. By now we should understand they all have the same interest. The interest is white supremacy. So don't believe all these people that say, oh, we're in America, America does for itself, blah, blah, blah. America, again, is a part of a global system. And anything that comes into conflict with that system is subject to be eliminated, i.e. Venezuela. I'm going to talk about that in another video. And anything that complements and furthers the American America's interest, being a white supremacist country, all of those things will basically be propelled by the American government. So that's just something to be clear about. Now back to the president of Guinea. This also shows that although you are an African president, you are also a part of this global system of white supremacy. And by now, if you've been on this channel for a long time, you should understand that there's a very big difference between an African leader and an African puppet. African leaders are people like Julius Malema, who is actually going to represent the people and their interests and what they want, and going to actually put himself on the line for the people. Kemi Siba, that's an African leader. These are people who are actually trying to lead Africans, not for themselves, but for Africans. But an African puppet is someone who is placed inside of these positions, placed in these positions of power, not because they're for the people, not because they want good for the people, but because their presence in the country is being manipulated by someone who's behind them, someone who is telling them what to do, telling them what to say, someone who's offering them deals, financial deals, saying, hey, if you let me exploit your country for its diamonds, if you let me exploit your country for its cobalt, if you let me exploit your country for its cocoa, if you do these things, then we will give you money, we will give you whatever you want. You'll be rich, but your people will be poor. These are African puppets. So the president of Guinea, who supposedly, again, pledged $2 million, not dollars, I'm sorry, euros, to the rebuilding of Notre Dame, despite the fact that his people are in poverty, his people are starving. This shows you he's not a part of the people, he's a part of the global system of white supremacy. So the question is, what do we as a people do when we find out our leaders have been compromised by the system? And it's not just people in Africa, because again, if you're in America, then your President Obama, he was completely compromised by the system of white supremacy. He might have had brown skin, he might have looked like us, he might have had a wife who looked like us, but that doesn't mean he wasn't compromised by the system. So the moral of the story, I think, is let's just awaken our consciousness and understand that there's a very big difference between people who are here to lead us and people who are part of this global system that are here to oppress us. And to me, I don't care if you're black, white, or whatever. If you're here to oppress my people, then you're an enemy of my people. Period. It shouldn't be something where we sympathize with the Ghanaian president because, oh, he looks like us. If you care so much for us, why not try to invest in your country with that money? Why not try to uplift the people around you? Why instead seek to enrich a country that not only is a colonist country that is continuing to oppress your people, but enrich a country that is enriched already, that has been enriched since they first took your goods and your resources? This is the common sense thing to ask. So anyways, as far as this is all I have to say. I would love to see your guys' comments, and I'll see you all in another video.